it's a chaos. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We are going to be on live stream as well. Before we start, in the chat, please enter your name, your company, what city you're dialing in from. And if you can, for those who are in the live room on Zoom, please turn on your video because we want you in the conversation. We want you in this dialogue. This is not just a regular webinar. I know some folks might be introverts, but trust me, it's a safe place to kind of really build the community. So for those watching this via live stream or on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook, you can interact with us in the comments, and I'll be checking it throughout yourself in the chat as well. So give me 1 second while I going to mute everyone real quick in a second. Okay. Okay, awesome. So now that I have everyone muted, welcome to Community of Seven's microlearning. What's a microlearning? It's a training and development that focuses on offering bite-sized small learnings in a short period of time. And our goal is really to kind of help you learn something that you can take in your day-to-day practice, whether it's at work or at home. So this is not a webinar where you passively listen to a talking head like me. We actually want you in the conversation. And we want you to take 1, 2, 3 actions immediately after the event. And as we are community focused, we want you to really connect with 1, 2, 3 other folks who are on this call or on LinkedIn or Facebook, wherever platform that you're using, because this is all about community. So feel free to ping each other, add each other. And I love when I see folks in this community talking to each other offline, because that means that we're really building these real connections, right? I don't want it to just be about what's on this screen. I want you to actually make connections offline, hopefully maybe meet each other in person if that ever happens one of these days. So today's topic is on the power of risk-taking with the amazing Tara Wilson. Before we begin, we always start our calls with a quick poll. So for this next activity, top right-hand side, I want you to put yourself on gallery mode so you should see everyone. We're kind of like the Brady Bunch, right? So I'm going to ask you a few questions. If the answer is yes, raise both hands like this. Ready? Okay. How many of you have a fear that you're currently working through right now? How many of you consider yourself risk takers? How many of you consider yourself risk adverse? How many of you have ever passed on an opportunity or maybe didn't ask someone out on a date or took a job that you look back and wish you had taken the risk? Okay, so top right-hand side, now put it on, what do you call it? Not gallery mode, the speaker mode, so you should just see me. Hi, everyone. Give me 1 second to pin myself. So I don't know if any of you've noticed, but when we were doing the quiz just now, I raised both my hands when I asked if I was a risk taker, but also I raised my hand when I asked how many of you are risk adverse. Most people assume that I'm a risk taker because I've been an entrepreneur for most of my life or an entrepreneur within a company. Entrepreneurs are seen as risk takers, right? However, one of the things that whether a person's a risk taker or not is you have to kind of dig a little bit deep, right? Here's the thing, by nature, I'm a worrier. I was in my mom's womb in Vietnam when Vietnam was crumbling, right? We were a war-torn country. We were refugees. And I was a few months old when we literally escaped Vietnam for our lives. So my whole existence and upbringing was built on fear, escape, and persecution. That's a lot to unload right now. So while I was growing up, we didn't have much. So there was a constant fear of lack of money. We were kind of in a crime-ridden area, so there was also a fear of being robbed or taken advantage of. So how do you reconcile these two? My parents were the extremes. My mom was the planner, the worrier. She always saved for a rainy day. My dad was the risk taker, the gambler, the entrepreneur. What I learned at an early age was that you really need both. If you are afraid of taking risks like my mom, you would play it safe, but you'd also have a monotonous life. And you would never pursue things that truly made you happy because you would be afraid of taking those risks. On the other end, if I was a gambler and risk taker like my father, I could possibly lose everything financially and not be able to pay the rent and take care and support of my family. So I've straddled both worlds from learning from my parents. What you see as a risk taker who might, what you see in me in terms of someone who's a risk taker because I quit my job without anything lined up, if you peeled the onion a little bit, you would realize that I was also on that other side of the coin. I was also that person that was saving for my retirement since I was 18. I was someone who always created different streams of income. And I was someone who always saved money. And I always had what I call a FUIL account, which stands for, sorry for my French, FU, I'm leaving. Because I always think you need an exit strategy. So whenever I was at a job, and of course, not you, Eric, at Ignited, whenever I was at a job and I just hated the job, in the back of my mind, I always knew that I had this FUIL fund and that I could leave at any moment if I wasn't happy. And so there's this misconception that entrepreneurs are risk takers. And although that is partly true because it's necessary to take risks because that's what you need to start and grow a business, some of those risks, also include leaving a full-time job, a steady paycheck, using personal savings, and you're not really sure if there's going to be a return of investment at the end. However, Leonard Green, who's a professor of entrepreneurship at Babson College, says that entrepreneurs are actually not risk takers. They are calculated risk takers. Once again, they're not risk takers, they are calculated risk takers. So most entrepreneurs I know actively avoid risk and are dedicated to planning every small step to achieve their goal. However, once they commit to something, they dive all in, which seems like risk-taking to someone who is just watching from the outside. So last year, some of you guys might have been on the Let's Talk that I had with Rachel Tipograph. She's a founder and CEO of Micmac. They just raised $100 million Series A funding. But she told the story of how she left her high-profile job as a global digital and social media director at Gap to create her own company, Micmac. And she said that before she makes any big moves, she asked herself one question. This is the one question Rachel always asks. What's the worst thing that can happen? And if the worst thing that can happen is something that she can handle and deal with, she goes full in. She doesn't question things, she just jumps in. So when she started her company and she asked herself, what's the worst thing that could happen? Her answer was, the worst thing that can happen is I have to find a salary job. And after some thought, she was like, I can handle that risk. And she realized that it was okay for her to leave her job and start Micmac. So for many of us, we either exaggerate the worst case scenario and make it bigger than it possibly can, or worse, we become paralyzed because we're just afraid of the unknown. So by asking yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen? It's an easy way to kind of reframe the situation. Here's the power of risk-taking. You give yourself permission to try things, learn, fail, grow, and explore taking risks. You get to test your limits and go beyond what you believe was possible. I wish I could say I was a risk taker all of my life, but for most of my life, I played it safe. Sure, I would take a chance on myself once in a while, but I'd always tread back to the status quo. And I never was fully confident in myself enough to jump into the unknown until recently. And as many of you know, that happened when I got laid off and started Community of Seven. But once I learned the power of risk taking, or in other words, learning to believe in myself and the universe, things started to open up for me. That's why I've always gravitated towards risk takers and dreamers. That's why I instantly connected with Tara when I met her. And Tara was actually interviewing me for her podcast, Fierce Labs, which is amazing, and you should listen to it, as soon as you get off of here. One of the things she said at the end was that really stuck with me is her belief that sometimes you need to jump and the net will appear. What I've realized this past year between a pandemic, a friend dying, and being a caregiver for my mother with dementia is that life is too short for us to play it small. We need to live a big life. You need to live like you don't have tomorrow. And you really have to take that leap towards your dreams. About a decade ago, I was given this advice: jump off a cliff and build your wings on the way down. I didn't really truly grasp what it meant until this past year, when I got laid off at Fortune and started Community of Seven, which I self-funded by my severance and savings, and when I didn't make income for an entire year. But it was that faith that really held me through. And the quote is by author Ray Bradbury. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read you the full quote because I think it's very powerful. And I want you to really listen to this. If we listen to our intellect, we would never have love affairs. We'd never have friendships. We'd never go into business because we'd be cynical. It's going to go wrong, or she's going to hurt me, or I've had a couple of bad love affairs, so therefore. Well, that's nonsense. You're going to miss out on life. You've got to jump off the cliff all the time and build your wings on the way down. For me, jumping off the cliff has been about strengthening my faith in God and myself. I posted this recently, but I often recite Romans 8:31, which is, through God, I can do all. And when the will to quit gets strong, will never be stronger than my faith. Final thought: going after your dreams is really scary. Change is scary. You can get hurt. You can fail miserably. But at the end of the day, you get back up and you fight hard as hell. You bet on yourself over and over again. So before I introduce Tara, for those who are in the Zoom room and for those who are watching this on live stream on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook, I want you to answer in the comment, but don't press send yet. So type in the chat room. I'm going to ask this question right now. And you're going to answer in the chat, but not press send. What's the number one reason you feel people don't take risk? What's the number one reason why people don't take risk? And I'm going to count down. 3, 2, 1. Press send. Failure, fear of failure. I'm seeing a lot of fear of failure, judgment from others, a fear of failure. And I'm looking also on the live stream. And once again, a lot of that is fear of failure. Wow, I think it's almost 100% fear of failure. And 1 or 2 judge, okay, laziness, imposter syndrome. Okay, and even on live stream, I think it's kind of similar answers. Thank you guys for that. So I am so excited for today's guest, Tara Wilson. Tara founded her namesake experiential marketing agency to create emotional connections between clients, brands, and consumers. Since 2015, Tara Wilson Agency has helped business giants like Samsung, Nike, Lou & Grey, and ESPN redefine brand engagement. Her path to CEO of TW Agency has not been a straight line. As a graduate from Auburn University with a BBA in finance, she spent 9 years at Merrill Lynch, last holding the position of senior financial advisor. Drawing on her leadership qualities and passion for event design, she jumped and became an entrepreneur when she opened Tara Wilson Events, which later rebranded to Tara Wilson Agency. She spent 8 successful years executing social events. In 2019, she launched Fierce Labs, a podcast and conference series for women, which is coming up in Texas, and she's going to talk more about that at the end, to amplify their stories around the topics of career development, risk-taking, mental health, and financial empowerment. Tara has appeared on various national and local media outlets, including The Today Show, Entrepreneur, Smart Money, MSN, Business on Main, Fox Business, to name a few. She's appeared on various national and local media outlets as well. So Tara, I'm so excited for this conversation, and I can't wait to hear about your thoughts on how we can all become better risk takers. I really love that quote that you had in terms of jump and the net will follow. That was so powerful for me, and would love to kind of hear more in terms of what does it mean to you to be a risk taker?
Yeah, Lan, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's so great to be here, and so nice to see everyone. I was watching in the chat as to where you're from and who's here. I even have a couple of friends that messaged me on the side and said, I put on some lipstick and joined. So I put my lipstick on too. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you, everyone. And as Lan said, I'm the founder of Tara Wilson Agency, and I'm also the founder of Fierce Lab, which is an event series, podcast, and soon to be app for women, helping us amplify women's voices. So, Lan, you were asking me, like, what does it mean to be a risk taker? And you talk about the quote, leap and the net will appear. That really was my personal mantra when I chose to walk away from my corporate job and become an entrepreneur. But to be a risk taker, in my definition of it, is I think it's someone that's willing to bet on themselves, even in the face of adversity and or very long odds. And I think that comes from a place of knowing yourself and listening to your gut. Those two things have really served me personally well when I've decided to take risk. And, when you ask Lan, like, what holds you back from taking risk, and you had everybody put it in the chat, I didn't put mine in, but I heard someone say it. Mine is the fear of what other people will think. Is that not crazy? A lot of people, I don't worry about failing. I'm more worried about the outcome from the failure of how will people interpret me. And when you were teeing all this up, I went and got some notes. I've had these notes since 2018, kind of hidden on my desk, but essentially it's a story of when I stopped caring about what other people think. And I'm just curious, can we get a show of hands, or can people just maybe light up the chat? Does anyone else ever worry about what other people think about them? Is that something anyone else deals with, or is it just me? Yeah, maybe some hands up. Yeah. So I have a pivotal moment where I distinctly remember saying no more. I had gone to college at Auburn University and had really found myself relegating myself to the back, not stepping up for opportunities and not putting myself out there because I was really fearful of failing, and then that piece of what people would think of me. And finally, in my junior year, something clicked for me, and it had a lot to do, Lan, with what you said about recognizing that life is short. And I just kind of overcame that concern and said, all right, I'm going to do something really big. And at Auburn, we have, Student Government Association, and I opted to run for the senator from the College of Business. Never in my wildest dreams was I expecting to win. I'd done so many other things that I hadn't, but I was just like, I've got to put myself out there. And I actually did get elected. And from that moment forward, I recognized that trusting my gut, betting on myself, and making those kinds of decisions to like not care what other people think, it would advance me. And the truth is, no one's worried about me. They're worried about themselves, right? No one's concerned about what I've got going on. And that was the part I didn't know or understand in my, late teens, early 20s. But it was a pivotal moment for me, and it's very distinctive. And from that point on, I have opted to be a risk taker and to bet on myself.
And so I guess that risk taking you weren't born with it, right? So from what I gather, you didn't really, how was your kind of upbringing in terms of your parents' parenting style? Like I was telling you, my mother lived in fear. Yeah. And so I grew up kind of with this notion of be afraid of taking risks. My mom's favorite, word was just, no, don't, you can hurt yourself,
Sure.
So you didn't really change until you were like in college, really.
I grew up with the be concerned about what your actions and how they are perceived by others. And because of that, I held back. But I also was raised with this sort of thought process that I could do anything. My parents never said, you can be anything, you can do anything you set your mind to. That was never a discussion. It's just opportunities were always available, / I was encouraged to try new things with that parameter of be mindful of how you could be perceived by others. And that really held me back. And when I broke through that, then I really embraced my own thought process and philosophy on taking risks. And so now when I evaluate an opportunity, I'm not worried about what other people are thinking because it doesn't matter, anymore.
That's really a powerful insight, because if you notice, I would say 99%, 95% of the people, it was a fear of failure. But for you, it was a fear of judgment of what other people thought. Mm-hmm. And that had a lot to do with how you were raised. And, I think of my mother, right? It was like a fear of being hurt or failure or loss or financial loss. Mm-hmm. And so, I think one of the things that we really need to work out as humans is kind of taking the good parts of what we learned from our parents and our family, but then also kind of questioning some of the other ones that are not as positive, right? Or that can hold us back, right? Which I think, yeah, what were you saying, Tara?
Oh, no. Yeah, I think you can hang on. I mean, I believe most parents are trying to do the best by their children, right? And raise them based on what they believe to be the best thing. And I certainly know that about my own. But at some point you have to kind of come into your own. And I see in the chat that David asked, how? I love that. I get it, David. I know we want to know, how do we do these things? So how did I stop caring so much about what others thought? I can't specifically put my finger on it, but I'm going to talk about it in this term. I tend to do a lot of journaling. And at that time, I wasn't journaling so much as I was just doing a lot of self-reflection. And I recognized that I was really putting a lot of stock in a core group of people and their opinions, but I was miserable. They weren't miserable. And so recognizing that I was miserable because what the control I was allowing them to have, that was really powerful for me. And then just saying, okay, in spite of, my concerns here, I'm going to do it anyway. And it gets easier over time. And it got easier over time because it gets back to, I recognize they really weren't paying attention to what I was doing, and they didn't care, and they weren't laughing at me, or I was a blip. I wasn't even a blip on their radar, to be honest. And that applies now. Now, I will say that something I noticed as I've gotten older is I'll get in these zones where I don't toot my own horn, so to speak. And I describe it as this. If you need to know what I do for a profession, if you need to know about my agency, you'll know about it. Otherwise, I'm just going to fly under the radar. So I'm really bad about sharing out the accomplishments. People will often say, oh, I didn't even realize you do that, because I'm really reluctant to share too much. So I still hang on to it. I still hang on to that fear of judgment. I just kind of push myself to try new things in spite of it.
I love that, because I think I'm the same way too. And those who, go on this regularly know that I'm an introvert. But in the past year, I've really worked at making sure I have a voice, because I realized if I want to build my company, I don't have a huge marketing budget. So thought leadership is something that's really important. And so you have to toot your own horn in a lot of ways. I kind of want to go back and kind of talk about childhood. I don't know if you have any brothers or other kind of siblings, but I know for my family, the way my mother treated me was much different than my brother. So like if we were at a playground, my brother would jump from like 2 feet, or 2-story, structure. And she'd be like, okay, if I tried to, hop off of, something that's 2 feet high, she would just freak out. And I think this kind of this notion of like, we treat girls differently than we treat boys kind of growing up, whereas girls are taught to kind of play it safe and kind of be small, not take too much space, whereas boys are kind of taught to take risks. And that's why you see so many men who are kind of entrepreneurs, right? They're taught to, and this is not all men, just like it's not all females, right? Because we all have a different way we were raised. But when we're taught not to take risks, it impacts our future. And I think about Sarah Blakely, who is the CEO of Spanx. And one of the stories she always talks about is that when she was growing up, her father used to gather her brothers and sisters, and they used to basically trade stories of their biggest failure for the day, and it was celebrated. So I think about that a lot in terms of like the folks who kind of listed fear of failure as one of their biggest fears for not taking risks. Here you have someone who literally was in her dinner table with her family celebrating failing, right? Oh, I spoke in class and I, accidentally said this and the class laughed at me, ha, ha, ha. But it changes your mind frame. And I've been really conscious. I have a 7-year-old daughter, Morgan, and I've really been conscious of like letting her fail and telling her it's okay to fail and it's okay not to be perfect. And we actually laugh about it. Like, did you have like kind of this different background in terms of like fear? Because you mentioned that you don't have a fear of failure per se, but like, is there like a difference like growing up and how that kind of impacted you and your decisions?
Not in my family, no. I mean, I felt I got treated the same as my brother, who's almost 9 years older than me. So I don't see it there. Now, from a risk perspective, I wouldn't say my parents in general are risk takers. They aren't, and so they did kind of have that play it safe mentality. But I think it goes back, for me, it goes back to learning myself, knowing myself, and taking a lot of chances starting in my 20s. I mean, I moved across the country and didn't know a soul. Well, that's a risk when you don't know anybody. I mean, I often tell the story that my mom helped me move from college to Texas, where I live now. And she paid my first month's rent, bought me a mattress, and left me $100. And I was on my own, right? And a lot of kids, I was blessed to have that much. And the first week of work on Friday afternoon, I arrived back home and my electricity's turned off because I didn't pay my deposit. And you talk about like life hitting you square in the eyes, and you're right there in the real world all of a sudden. And from that moment on, I recognized, okay, it's on me. I'm responsible for me, and I've got to make decisions. And I made a lot of mistakes along the way, or failed, whatever we want to call it. But I just keep betting on myself. Let me talk about something that happened during the pandemic. When I talk about betting on myself, I think it's Beyonce that has that quote that she talks about, that she's going to bet on herself. The pandemic was hard on all of us. And if you're an entrepreneur, it was as equally hard. And in my case, I do live events for a living. So eventually, if you don't have any live events, your cash flow runs out. There's just no other way to say it. Nothing else there's no way to sugarcoat it. And I got to a point where everything had dried up and I had very little runway. And I'm looking at my cash flow worksheet and I'm evaluating the expenses that I have coming up. And I look at my retirement savings account and I'm like, am I going to do this? Am I going to take the money out of my retirement account that I worked so hard to build up because I made stupid financial mistakes, which is the reason that Fierce Lab focuses on financial intelligence for women, because I've made all the mistakes. But I said to myself, am I going to do this? Am I going to empty this, put it in my bank account, and give myself 8 more, 12 more weeks of runway? And I recall saying to myself, at what point do I stop betting on me? That's a really hard place to be in when you think about, how willing are you to bet on yourself? This is a part of risk, right? And I thought about that as I was preparing for today, because like people want tangible, concrete, like, how do you do it? And I get it. I want to know it too. So for me, it comes back to that willing to bet on myself, even in the face of adversity and long odds. But I kind of have a 5-step process. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Would love that.
Okay. And I see some things are happening in the chat. So I don't know if there's any questions that come through their land. So if there are, by all means, interrupt me. I want to make sure I hit.
Let me, before you go into your 5, let me kind of read some of the comments because I think they're really powerful. On LinkedIn, Angel says, my mom and dad always said, you're either a part of the problem or a part of the solution. So choose to be a part of the solution in society. Marie Helene has a really good comment. I think we also need to appreciate the environment we grew up in, which is a really good point, because, I use that example of my mom and their kind of example of leaving Vietnam. It's just a different cultural awareness and different experience, and take that perspective from your culture. Andra says, I think for me, fear of comparison, and she's been compared her entire life to her cousin, and she was a perfect person and I didn't fit in with the family, and it follows me to this day. And so once again, dealing with some of the past bullshit that we've been told as we've grown up, and how do you kind of deal with it, right? Mm-hmm. We got to have a lot of other great, Katie, I stopped doing that when I learned it didn't serve me well. And she was fortunate to have learned that young. And now she's trying to teach her kids to be themselves and not to let other people think or basically other people influence who they want to be. Mm-hmm. So why don't you kind of take it away from here and then give us the 5 kind of suggestions.
Sure. Thank you for reading those. I appreciate it. And I do see the comment about keeping up with the Joneses. And I do think that phrase was coined here in Dallas, Fort Worth, no doubt about it. And I did that in my 20s, kept up with the Joneses, and paid for it in my 30s. But, I try and think about, like, when is risk good? And when is risk bad? Well, risk is bad if you're unwilling to look at all sides of it. If you put blinders on, and sometimes you do have to have some blinders on in order to really take that leap of faith. I mean, not being a bit naive is okay, but burying your head in the sand is just an impossibility. You shouldn't do it. So, but when is risk good? For me, it's good when it moves me forward, and when it gets me closer to my own mission. And at Fierce Lab, we talk about like knowing your why. And that's one of the things that, you know, we recommend starting with is like understanding what's your reason, what's your core why, and then from there evaluating like how does this opportunity to have some risk in your life get you closer to that. And your why could be a variety of different reasons, but it could be worth it if it gives you achievement or allows you to achieve some sort of creativity or freedom, personal development, a level of self-respect that you're looking for. And then of course, you know, there are other elements that are a little bit more, you know, worldly, such as fame and wealth. And there's nothing wrong with those things. Just like someone said, you know, there's nothing wrong with tooting your own horn, right? So knowing your why and evaluating the risk and how it aligns to that core value and core mission for yourself, that's when it's good, is if it's going to move you that way. For me, I kind of go through a 5-step process. The first thing I do is I listen to my gut. And Lan, you were talking about like listening to the universe and talking to the universe. And, you know, the universe can be a multitude of things for people. It could be God. It could just be the universe, right? And everything in between. So I'll refer to it as listening to the universe and having a conversation about what's right for me. And I know that if I listen to my gut, I'm never led astray. It's when I don't listen to my gut that I really regret it. And so I really try and evaluate things against that instinct. And that's a hard place to be. You have to really tune into that. I don't know. I'd be curious to know how many people are really good at listening to their gut. If you don't mind maybe sharing in the chat there. But I had to fine tune that. I'm 45. And so I'm getting better about knowing it and recognizing it and understanding that little, nope, don't do that. And because when I go against it, I pay for it. So that's the first step. My second step is I evaluate the cost of taking the risk. And that cost comes in a variety of different ways. And there's probably 3 key distinct things that I evaluate. What's it going to cost me from a time perspective? What does it look like? How does that impact the time that I have to do all the things that I want to do? How does it impact my family and the time that we have together? How does it impact what it means for my business and the time that I have to build that? So what is the cost from a time perspective? What is the cost from a monetary perspective? How much skin do I have to put in this game? And how long is it going to, you know, am I ever going to recoup any of it? Or is it, you know, a sunk cost and I just have to deal with that? So I really evaluate the monetary piece and if I can afford it. And I'll tell you something about that. I'll break money down into like the cost of right now and how I can spread that cost out over multiple months. So if I have a big goal that's going to cost me monetarily a lot of dollars. So let's use the Fierce Lab app as an example. Well, you don't build an app for free. We certainly have a full team working on this and rolling it out. And so there are costs associated with it. So I really evaluate, okay, can I manage these costs this month? Can I handle this? And so I really break it down into bite-sized pieces. I try not to think about the big dollar amount. My CFO might prefer I think about it in the big dollar amount, but I really break it down and I evaluate, can I spend it right now in this increment of time with this amount of money? The third thing I evaluate is the sacrifice. So if I choose to take this risk, what am I sacrificing? Is it friendships? Is it time with friends? Is it the core of my business? You know, you mentioned, Lan, that I owned an event planning company and I did that for 8 years and I decided to change my business model, meaning that I opted to no longer do social events. We know them as weddings, right? That was the bulk of the business. And that wasn't repeat business that I could do. One would hope for those couples. And so the question becomes, what was I going to have to sacrifice to change that business model? I had to turn away a lot of business that was going to come my way to really focus in on being an agency and going the experiential route. So that's another example of what I evaluate. So I listen to my gut. I evaluate the cost. The costs in my mind are time, money, and sacrifice. And then I think about, can I achieve it? And to evaluate whether I can achieve this goal that requires a lot of risk, I break it into bite-sized pieces. I'm venturing to guess that a lot of people do this, but I spend time thinking of the goal on an annualized basis. And so I really evaluate, like, what's this big, hairy, audacious goal? So let's use the Fierce Lab app. I developed the concept last year. I made it a goal for 2021. And my annual goal is to launch launch the app. I do that analysis solo and with trusted advisors, mentors, and an advisory board. From there, I break it down into quarterly steps. And the reason I do this, the reason I'm sharing these steps with you, is because this is how I make risk manageable for me. And I'm like Dave, I want to know the how somebody did it. It's not enough to just know you did it. I want to know how. So that's why I'm sharing this. So the quarterly, so I have the big goal of launch an app in 2021. What do I need to do quarterly to accomplish that? I break it out. And I do that with an accountability partner, and she's a fellow risk taker. So we get together every quarter. She has what she's trying to accomplish, and I have what I'm trying to accomplish. And I'm literally thinking, how do I move this ball forward in these next 3 months? Talking about moving the ball forward, I want to give you an analogy that comes out of the book called The Secret. It goes back to believing in the universe. In the book, I think it's Bob Proctor that talks about, you're on the West Coast in California and you're going to drive to the East Coast in New York, and you're going to do that at night. Well, you have headlights on that car, and those headlights only allow you to see about 200 feet in front of you, but you trust that you're going to get from California to New York based on just seeing 200 feet in front of you. That is my life. That is all of our lives. We just can't possibly know what's coming at us much beyond 200 feet. And if someone tells you they know, that I happen to think they're making that up. So when I plan out my quarterly goals, that's my 200 feet in front of me. That's as far as I can see. I know where I'm going, but 200 feet in front of me is where I can see. And again, I do that with an accountability partner because I have someone that I want to hold me accountable. And then finally, I break that into monthly to-dos, and I keep up with them. Now, I bet some of you are amazing and really well organized, and you're keeping up with it weekly and daily. I can't break it down that far. So I break it down monthly. So the third thing I ask myself is, how can I achieve it? So I listen to my gut, I evaluate the cost, and then I evaluate how can I achieve it? And I break that goal into bite-sized pieces to make it manageable. Once I've done that, I socialize it. Now, here's where the judgment comes in. This is probably the scariest place for me because I am so concerned about what other people think. But this is when I start sharing it with people. So I start small, I get feedback, I refine the idea, then I spread it out a little further to a wider circle. I get feedback, I evaluate the idea, and then so on and so forth. Till I've eventually publicly shared with a group of 100 people that I'm launching an app called Fierce Lab. Once I've done that, then the only thing left for me to do is to set my fears aside, because they're still here. I'm petrified of failing. And as we've established, worried about what people think. but I dive in anyway. I do it anyway. Back probably 5 or 6 years ago, maybe as long as 7, I can't even calculate anymore. I signed up for an Ironman. Was sitting under a tree at the pool, having a cocktail, and it sounded like a good idea. And I just, on my phone, signed up for an Ironman, not knowing what I was in for whatsoever. That was very challenging, a lot of risk. And there were many days that I didn't want to do the work that was required, but I wanted the outcome. I wanted to cross that finish line and say I'm an Ironman. And so when it was raining, when I got a flat, when I bonked on a run, when I didn't feel like swimming, I told myself, do it anyway. And it's the same thing with fear. Feel the fear and do it anyway. And sometimes I keep thinking about David over here, and he wants to know the how. So David, how do I feel the fear and do it anyway? I talk out loud to myself. I'm having a bad swim and it's not going well. I pop up out of the water and I give it to myself. Tara, you didn't come this far to just come this far. Put your head in the water and swim. I've had to do that in a race, only I use more colorful language. I'll refrain from doing that here. But one of the ways that I do it is I just talk to myself and I just remind myself of what's it going to feel like if I stop versus what am I going to feel like if I keep pushing through? And even if I don't land on that big goal, if I did everything in my power, then I feel proud. And these are the steps that I'm taking when I'm thinking about absorbing a risk. So those are the 5 steps. Let me recap. Listen to my gut, evaluate the cost, decide how I can achieve it, socialize it, and then set aside my fears and do it anyway. So Leanne, I'll pause there. I know that was a lot.
I love all that. What's interesting is that it goes back to what I was kind of saying earlier about entrepreneurs on the outside seem like they're these huge risk takers, when what they really are calculated risk takers. Because everything you outlined there, it first started off with, trust your gut, but it all that risk. Can I achieve this? Socialize it, set aside your fears. I mean, it's kind of like those questions that are on the outside. People don't see the work that you take to get there. And, it's kind of like that example I gave of like my, always kind of saving since I was 18, right? So it might seem like I'm taking a risk by quitting a job, but I've also had a cushion because I've, saved all my money and I don't live like a large, lavish life, right? Mm-hmm. Because I always want to be able to take care of my family if I lost my job or if I didn't have any income taking. So it's kind of that measured kind of risk there. Mm-hmm. I want to kind of open this to some question, and let me add number 5 really quick. Mm-hmm. Rajat, do you want to unmute and ask your question? Ask your a question? No, Rajat, are you there? Okay, I can ask you the question for you too. So Rajat asked, how would you measure the success of your launch?
Yeah, I'm here. And
do you want to ask your question?
No, you already did. So
okay. I hope I asked it correctly.
Yeah. Well, through the lens of risk taking, I'll answer it this way. It will, from that lens, it will be a success because I took a nugget of an idea that was just whiteboarded all alone in my office during the pandemic on days where I just really didn't think I was going to have a business left, and have turned it into an actual app. So for me, from the lens of taking this risk, it's a success. I understand what you're asking. You're probably asking like, what metrics are we evaluating and those types of things. And I think that's a completely separate conversation for maybe a different webinar. But through the lens of taking this risk, it will be a success because I birthed something into the world that was just an idea up here. And I know the value that it'll have for users, specifically women.
Oh, that's great. And I had one more question, if I could ask it. I asked it a little while ago.
Okay.
The question that I said was, I stopped caring about what others thought about me a long time ago, but the judgments didn't stop. And that became a barrier to what I was going to do next.
Mm-hmm. Meaning your judgment?
The judgment of others as to what I was doing.
Yeah.
So
I went to lunch with a friend today, and I shared with her, and this may be what you're referring to with the judgments of others. There are people that we think are going to rally around us and support us and cheerlead and champion and make those networking introductions and buy those tickets and download the apps and give you the job and all the things. And they don't. And it is crushing, is it not? Because they were the people you were counting on. But the flip side is, it's the people that you weren't counting on that rally around you and give you the praise and support you in a way that you never expected or never saw coming. So it hurts. Those people that judge, or I like to say, they throw cold water on your ideas. That'll never succeed. They want to tell you all the reasons it won't work, or they don't buy the ticket or download the app, that kind of thing. So something I do, and we haven't talked a lot about gratitude, but something that I try and do, I do it every night, not try, I do. When I put my head on the pillow at night, I tick through all the things from the day that I'm grateful for. And when I have days where the people that I thought would rally don't, I make it a point to double down on being grateful for the people that do rally for me, and it doesn't stop the hurt, in my opinion, but it helps me push through. And then, quite frankly, I'm motivated by proving those people wrong. So
one of my favorite quotes, Tara, is, we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. Choose wisely. And so one of the things I've really kind of focused on is just surrounding myself with people who are positive, and kind of, I won't say taking out people who aren't, but like putting them a little bit farther in terms of my circle of trust in a lot of ways, because we're so influenced by the people who are around us. And I want to be around people who are uplifting me, right? And so that includes whether it's LinkedIn or people in the real world in my community. You really need to kind of surround yourself with good people that are going to push you forward. And I mean, I'm really fortunate that there's so many good people around me that has inspired me.
Lynn.
And Sharon, do you want to, I love this, prove them wrong every time. I love this. Where are you, Sharon? One of my favorite people. So I think we have time for one more question. Anyone want to ask a question for Tara? No? If you do, just unmute yourself and ask. Okay. Olu.
Yeah, hi, Len. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Tara, for the amazing insights and just confirming some of the things that we do go through as entrepreneurs or as creators or innovators and dreamers. But I just want to say that regarding, the people that don't show up for you, that you think, would show up for you, I believe, going the route that Lan went, in her faith, this has been forever. I remember when Jesus, he wasn't appreciated in his home country, in his hometown, and he said, a prophet is without honor. So anytime you're launching and you think that it's the people that are around you, like your family, your friends, that would, root for you, you're priming yourself for a disaster, for a failure, because they would, and the reason being that they are too familiar with you, and they haven't seen you in the light of the best expression of yourself. So they don't get to appreciate what you can bring to the table, because they have known you all their lives, and they kind of process things from that perspective. So for a long time, I used to get hurt and thinking, oh, why? But now it doesn't bother me, because I believe that there are people that are out there that would support you and would help you be the best expression of yourself. So don't get it too hard, don't bother about it, but just move on. And then on the other side, prove the naysayers wrong by giving it your best shot. So that's what I want to bring to the table. Back to you, Len. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you, Lou. So Tara, as we kind of close up, how can we support you? And I posted some links to Tara and also her LinkedIn.
Okay.
So kind of show her some love right now, right? How can we support you?
Sure, thank you. So what I'm sharing on screen, I hope everyone can see this. Take a screenshot or use your phone to take a picture of the QR code. A couple of things I want to share with you. Fierce Lab Live is a live event experience that'll happen on October 2nd. And we have both in person here in Dallas, as well as virtual programming. But the 4 key pillars of Fierce Lab are career development, financial intelligence, mental health, self-care, and risk-taking. That's why Lan asked me to come on today. So we have a full day of programming. This is $100 off of our in-person experience and $25 off if you want to join us virtually. And the other thing I would ask is email us, Fierce Lab. So Fierce Lab, there is no S on the end. So Fierce Lab at Tara, T-A-R-A, Wilson, WILSON.com. And if you will email me, I will send you our 6 questions to ask yourself when the reward is greater than the risk. And it's a worksheet that goes into even more detail of questions you can use for yourself in evaluating risk beyond the 5 steps that I take. I'd love to share that with you. And if you do email me, then we'll make sure that if you'd like to be the first to be a part of our app community, we'll offer you a 60-day free trial to the premium version. There's also a free version we're launching. So wanted to share that.
Awesome. So Tara, can you move the screen so we see everyone?
Yeah.
So everyone, if you can kind of put this in gallery mode so that we see everyone on the screen. Okay. So you guys already know the deal. Please turn on your camera. Okay, unmute yourself. I'm going to leave you with this quote, and it's a very powerful quote by Maya Angelou. Hope and fear cannot occupy the same space. Invite one to stay. Let me repeat this because I need this in your heads right now. Hope and fear cannot occupy the same space. Invite one to stay. I hope you invite hope into your world right now. So unmute yourself, put yourself, your video on, because I think Tara deserves a huge applause and
thank you, everyone. Thank you.
You've been amazing.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And so make sure you support Tara, Fierce Lab, Tara Wilson events, add her on LinkedIn. Once again, connect with each other offline as well, because we're trying to create a community that goes beyond these 4 kind of Zoom walls. And really, this is a space for you guys to really support each other, really kind of hold each other up and support what everyone is doing. But once again, start taking risk. I know it's scary, but one of my other favorite quotes is this: everything you want is on the other side of fear. So all of you guys had posted fear, fear, fear in terms of why you don't take risk. Everything you've wanted, from love to work to, accomplishing your wild dream, everything you want is on the other side of fear. So take that jump, and the net will appear. Thanks, guys. See you at the next event. Woohoo!
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.